All right, dudes. As preface, it's a one guest town on episode 40 of the Spicer Speaking podcast. Good thing that we have high quality guest, fellow scribe, fellow ink stained wretch. He's known as the purveyor of the pronoun. He's an asset to the adjective, supplicant to the semicolon, a nuisance to the noun. His vocation is the verb, and he's British. Coming to us today from Bellingham, Washington, by way of Bangor and Mash. It's our friend Tony Deere. Tony, what's up, man?
How long have you been working on that? That was exceptional.
I think I've been working on it since the plane ride back from northern New Mexico when I saw you last, back I guess last month.
Can you send it to me or the text? Because that was amazing.
I will not send it to you because then it will force you to go back and actually listen to episode 40 of the Spicer Speaking podcast, which included in this interview does also have some golf poetry. And I mentioned that, Tony, because you told me candidly that while you'll be happy to share this episode and do those other things I asked you to do, that you probably won't listen to it. And you said that in your writing endeavors, which I should mention include Links Magazine, Colorado Avid Golfer, McKellar Magazine, Points Beyond, you don't actually even read your own work anymore. Is that accurate?
That's entirely accurate. Yeah, there's I'll tell you why in a moment, but there's once it, I mean, at the end of the day, once something comes out, it's different now with the internet, I suppose, where you can change it once it's been published. But back in the day, I mean, once you've sent it and once it's been printed and published, there's absolutely nothing you can do about it. And if you want it changed, or if there's something in there that you don't like, there's nothing you can do about it. And that, I mean, as a young 20 something writer, you
not anymore though.
That
was some time ago.
This was a long time ago.
Okay.
You pour sweat and blood into everything you write, and then a sub-editor who comes along and has 10 minutes to review it, rewrite it, make it look as if he's important and doing his job, makes a change. And it's something you've been thinking about for days or weeks even, and it absolutely gets your goat. It used to rile me up so badly, and I'm sure it does. I'm sure it did any writer. And so I don't think I made a definite decision, but I think over time I decided with myself, look, it's not worth it. It's not worth the anguish that you put yourself through because of what a sub-editor has done.
Tony, before I follow up on that, I guess a little bit more broadly, and you kind of intimated it there, like myself, you and I, we talked about this before. We've both been doing this for a long time. I think I've been in the writer's chair for 23 years now. How long have you been doing it as a pro?
1993 was my first printed article. So what's that? So 28 years.
Yeah, been doing it for a good long spell. And to go back to what you just said about the editorial process, I mean, I personally see it both ways. And sometimes I too either neglect or probably decline to go back to the final printed published product because of that very fear that something is going to be changed of which I would not approve. And it's not my words, or some case singular. It's not my particular word. It's a word that's not my voice, that I would have never used, and I don't want to see it attached to my byline. So there are certain publications, I won't out them in this episode of the Spicer Speaking podcast, that I never go back to read the finished product because I know a certain editor is always going to make changes.
Absolutely.
For you, it sounds like it's part pride, maybe part pain, perhaps part frustration, that part of the writing process as it moves into a published final product.
All of that, all of those. Yeah, I mean, as I said before, if you've spent so much time and researched something so heavily, and really gotten deep into the subject and written about it, for someone who is, I'll tell you the story of I think how it came about, how I felt about this came about. I was when I was probably 23, 24, I was a junior staff writer on a magazine called Four in England. And I remember succinctly, one day it was lunchtime and I was the only one. I had some work to do, so I was the only one left in the office. Everyone else had gone down the pub, and I was the only one left in the office. And one of my colleagues' phones rang, so I answered it just to say, he's not here. Can I take a message? And it turned out to be HarperCollins, the book publisher.
Huh?
And instead of taking a message, the person I spoke with had a message for me. He said I don't know who you are, but we are desperate for a writer. The HarperCollins used to do these, I don't know if they still do, but they do these little pocket gems, little tiny little books that you can slip in your back pocket about every subject you can think of. And the writer said, we need a writer desperately. We have about 4 weeks to go before we need to publish the pocket gem golf. Do you know anything about golf? I said, yes, I write about it for a magazine called Four, the same magazine as my colleague. He says, well, can you do it? I said, you want me to write a book in four weeks about golf? He said, yeah. So I think I was 23, so I had no idea of, no experience in the publishing industry apart from this magazine that I work for. The book publishing industry had no experience of it whatsoever. So I said, yeah, not knowing what it would curtail. And I wrote it. And, if you spend, I basically took holiday, vacation time, wrote it, up at 7 every day, finish it 7, 8 every night, 12 hours a day, 7 days a week for 4 weeks, and wrote this book, and just just so heavily involved in the subjects and so immersed in everything you're doing. And then so I sent the document to the editor, and I don't hear from him or anyone at the company. This is not HarperCollins. They have subcontracted to another company, and a London company, to actually produce the book. And I don't hear from them for 6 weeks, or 6 weeks, I think. And all of a sudden, I'm in a bookshop one day in Cambridge, I think it was, and I see it. I see it on the shelf, and my heart sinks because I know something about editing and how that process works. Working for the magazine. So I'm thinking, this is very odd that they haven't contacted me in since I sent the document in. And I go over to the shelf, pick it up, look through it, and I'm just crestfallen. So I bought the copy because they didn't send me any. So I bought the copy and studied it later that day and discovered 120. I still remember that figure. I've 120 alterations to the text, to the photographs, the images, the captions, everything. That was different from what I sent.
And it still had your name on it, of course.
And this is 25 years ago, 25 years ago, and it still rankles me. It was it was the first real example of this happening, first real occurrence. And I didn't know anything about it, but my editor at the magazine, he had some experience in the book publishing world and said, well, you should sue them, because this has got your name written all over it, and it's not a good look. Because I mean, the one thing that sticks in my mind the most for some reason is they had flipped a photograph of Faldo. Faldo was obviously the biggest name in the game, especially in England at the time. So flip a photograph of him and have him as a left-hander was it's quite jarring. And he suggested I sue, and I had no idea how to go about that. So I made a couple of inquiries, got absolutely nowhere, and it's still out there.
Let's take it from the days of yore to modern day and the writing world. Again, this is something you and I have been, listeners should know, on, I think, upwards of 3, maybe even 4 media trips, golf trips together over the years. And as a reiteration, we were together recently in northern New Mexico for the Black Mesa trip. And I think you and I have touched upon this a few times. The changing appetite for not just the reader, but for the publisher or editor for the written word doesn't just pertain to golf articles, for many different styles of articles. You've contributed to almost every issue of the excellent McKellar magazine, the journal that I've been in once. I'll be in the next issue. But places and pages like that are few and far between these days, where there's an opportunity to really write, to do a narrative, to tell a story. I'm fortunate that I have a couple others that I really feel let me do that. STGA's 4 magazine certainly included on that list. But what do you see as we're nearing 2022 for the appetite for the types of stories? You can specify the outlets if you want, but even just broadly speaking, Tony, what do you think editors are looking for and readers are looking for more so now than maybe what we were asked to write a couple decades ago?
I wanted you to finish that so you didn't have to edit it, but my dog is going mental.
That's okay. That's
can you
okay.
Give me a couple of minutes.
You sure?
Hang on, man. Sorry. Come on, then. Come on. Come on. Come on. It's a good question. Obviously, the internet and the way people's lives are going, the way society's going, means we need it shorter, we need it snappier, we need bite-sized, and I don't care for it. I don't like it, because I like to read great writing, and actually, now I think about it, it kind of reminds me of I was watching a show last night with my daughter called It's Baking from Britain, baking show, great British baking show or something.
Okay.
I don't watch any TV. I just watch it with my daughter occasionally, and she's into this baking show at the moment. And there was a contestant from Liverpool. And apparently she was a total mess. She did some quite good stuff, which meant that she progressed quite far on the show. But her reputation was that she was a bit of a mess, and all of her cakes and biscuits and whatnot, they looked a bit of a mess. And that was gonna cause her to lose in the next show. I mean, the judge's patience with her was about to come to an end, and she was about to be thrown off. Or that's what I read from what my daughter was telling me. Anyway, so one of the last episode was they had to make what I believe I think it was called a celebration cake, a cake to celebrate some wonderful moment. And hers was brilliant. Hers was absolutely brilliant. And the judges were kind of taken away by it. But the problem was all of her fellow competitors, all of their cakes were absolutely brilliant as well.
Okay.
So she couldn't stand out. Her cake didn't stand out because everyone else's was really good as well. And that kind of, well, the question got me thinking along those lines, because these days there's so much high quality writing. There's so many good. I mean, if I list names, I'll leave some out. So I mean, is that fair? I don't know. I mean, maybe the publications. There's so many great publications: Golf Magazine, Golf Digest, McKellar, Golfers Journal. Golf Channel has some great writers. Where it's easy to find really, really good quality golf writing these days. And I think when I was growing up, certainly, and before that, there was so little of it. We know of writers from the 60s, 70s, 80s, well, up to the 80s, because there were so few of them. We know about Herbert Warren Wind, who was, long before that, certainly. We know about Bernard Darwin. We know about Warren Wind. We know about Pat Ward Thomas, Leonard Crawley, Peter Dobriner, because, I mean, there's 5 names from a span of, I don't know, 40 years, 50 years, 60 years, 70 years. These days, you could name 10 great, really good writers, just from today. You'll read 10 great articles today from 10 different writers. And the this also makes me think of something. A couple of weeks ago, I wrote an article for Links about that celebrated bland holes.
Bland holes.
Bland holes, B-L-A-N-D, bland, mundane holes. Now this admittedly took quite a while to, the idea to persuade the editors to go for, because you don't really want bland on your front cover, or or anywhere. If you're trying to sweeten readers, you don't really have bland in the title. But I thought that the beauty of bland was a legitimate article. I thought it would work, because that going back to the golden ages, Tom Simpson especially, he would say he actually wanted to design a bad hole, or a mundane hole. If you ask designers that know him these days, that they kind of have trouble actually specifying one. But Simpson said himself that he wanted to design a bad hole for variety's sake. And so I find with writers these days, great writers, and with golf, it relates very well with golf courses, because golf courses these days, you don't want to have bland holes. With social media and the way golf courses are marketed, you don't want anything to do with bland. And so writers, I feel, as I said, they're kind of joined. Writers don't want bland sentences or anything, the article has to be short, sweet, and punchy, and get you straight away. And I feel like if you go back and read Warren Wind and Crawley and Ward Thomas, and Darwin to an extent, but he was exceptional. You find that you read it, and it's not like, another great example is David Owen, New Yorker, Golf Digest.
Right.
You might not read every sentence to go, wow, amazing sentence, incredible, amazing turn of phrase there in that sentence, or whatever. You'll just enjoy the flow of the narrative, and you'll just be sucked in, but you won't specify any sentence or any turn of phrase or any word in particular, and then bang, the last paragraph, the last line, the last sentence, the last word even would just suddenly bring the whole thing together so beautifully. I think David Owen was probably the best of those that I've ever read. And it just leaves you with a sense of satisfaction and delight that you've read this article.
Friends, you're tuning in to episode 40 of the Spicer Speaking podcast. Speaking of great golf writers, it's my pleasure to have one join this week. It's Tony Deere. Of course, can read or have seen his work in Links Magazine, Colorado Avid Golfer, McKellar Magazine, and Points Beyond. You can also follow him on Twitter at Tony J. Deere. Not sure what the J stands for. Maybe we'll find out. Tony has intimated a few times there, your métier, your sweet spot, as I see it, correct me if I'm wrong, is writing about golf architecture. You're very well educated. You've got a particularly keen eye for designers, generations of design styles. Would you agree with that? That's your sweet spot in golf writing? And if so, why does that interest you so much?
That's how it's panned out. Certainly, it's John, by the way. Yeah, it's not something that I decided 25, 30 years ago that I would definitely that's what I definitely wanted to write about. But that's how it's worked. I mean, I suppose because it is by far and away the aspects of the game that I'm more interested in, most interested in. I used to be a teaching pro, so I wrote instruction. And from that equipment, I was a senior equipment editor on a magazine in Britain. So I still write equipment for Colorado Avid Golfer. So I'm still kind of, I suppose, stepped into, have fingers in pies in most aspects of the game. But I think the one that has interested me most and the one that I found my sweetest spot in is architecture.
As a follow-up from that, I think it begs asking, and we'll come out and make it a two-part question. Who or whom are two architects, golf architects, whose work you particularly enjoy, and who are or whom are two whose work you think is pretty crummy?
That question is like, when it's I think I asked the question once and I got the response that I expected, and then I've seen 100 times since, but I've never asked since. And that's when you ask a designer what their favorite course is, and they always say it's like asking me who my favorite favorite kid is.
I got that exact answer.
You get exactly the same answer. I've never. As I said, I might have asked it once. Who are my two favorite designers? If I take one from the golden age and one from now, bearing in mind there are an awful lot more that I respect and whose work I admire. I'll say from the golden age, Colt, because Colt, I played a lot of Colt courses as a teenager and as a young 20-something. When I caddied for my dad played a lot of the great courses around London and England as a society member and as a golf club member. And so I caddied for him a lot. And while they were, the society was eating and drinking in the clubhouse afterwards, I'd nip out and play the golf course. So I played a lot of great Colt courses that way. And that was, before I had any knowledge of, who Harry Colt was or why it was such a great course. As I've gotten older and as I've read so much more, it's become clear why they're so good. Of course, admittedly, they had great sites. But then, Sunningdale, the Berkshire, West Byfleet, West Hill, Worplesdon, Woking, they're wonderful sandy sites, with not too much elevation change, but some elevation change, wonderful foliage, just great, perfect for golf. But as I've gotten older, and I've seen bad designs, I've seen, I've seen a lot of golf courses, so I know what's good and what's bad. It's obviously not enough to have a great site. If you were given the exact same site that Harry Colt was given, or actually Willie Park had already, been given Sunningdale, but Harry Colt came along a little later to amend it.
I think that most great architects would tell you in some respect, if not the greatest, that it is dependent on the land. There has to be a canvas of some sort to work with from the beginning. All right, let me more contemporary, that architect that you really enjoy or
okay.
respect.
Sorry, when my phone went off there, I just wanted to say, if an architect today was given exactly the same site that Colt was given at Sunningdale, or Willie Park had been given it, what would they do? Or how would it look? Obviously, when you grow up, you have this strange idea that the routing is kind of already in place. I mean, that's what everyone would do. And so it's just the individual holes that might look different from one designer to another. But of course, when you actually think about it and you stop being so blind to it, you realize that how the holes are configured and where they appear and why they appear there is by far and away the most important part of being an architect. And Colt did it brilliantly. So the journey that Sunningdale Old, I'll use Sunningdale Old and Sunningdale New, the journeys that both courses take you on are just, they're just supreme. They're just absolutely wonderful. They give you such a range of shots, uphill, downhill, in the trees, out of the trees. And it's just exquisitely done, and making perfect use of the land to give you shots that you'll remember forever. And you think, well, a really bad architect, had they been fortunate, they would never have been given a site like that, but had they been given a site like that, what would they have done? And they would never have come out with a course, or very unlikely to have come out with a course as engaging and as time honored, one that has remained great for 100 years,
Right,
as Sunningdale or St George's Hill. But the contemporary architect that I'm most fond of, and again, there are plenty that I'm very fond of, but the one I'm most fond of is probably David Kidd, because we do get on very well. We're not best of friends or anything, but we get on very well, and I do consider him a friend. He's been very good to me. He invited me on a trip to Nicaragua about, I suppose it must have been 6 or 7 years ago, to see a course that he was designing down there. He actually flew me in his plane, a little propeller plane, out
very
to
nice.
Gamble Sands last year to see the short course. We just got on great, and I find he's hilarious. He's if you ever get the chance, just someone who can, at dinner or anywhere, can just take over the table, and not in an arrogant listen to me way, but in a hilarious, just gushing with stories. Just such an interesting guy, and brilliant golf courses.
And of course, Bannon Dunes, among them, Gamble Sands that you mentioned, done a lot of international work as well. I guess we'll close it. We'll close out the chat with this one then, Tony. One or two whose work you think is maybe a little sloppy or overwrought.
Really?
if you
we have
want,
to do.
if we don't have, I mean, is it going to jeopardize a future job or interview? I mean, I'll put it this way, man. I mean, I think I've played enough Greg Norman courses to know that basically most of his work at some stage of his career has had a redesign, and generally way the hell too hard for the mid handicap golfer. I realize that those are pretty basic reactions. We're not getting super esoteric or technical with some of Greg Norman's design problems. But for me, when I go on a trip or go, I've written about one of his courses, I always have a grain of skepticism before teeing up on that first hole. If you want, you can choose somebody that's dead, if that makes you feel better.
Um, I say this. This is completely honest, but even though I have seen, an awful lot of golf courses, I don't make a point of seeing bad ones. So there aren't really sort of golf courses today that I've gone to and thought, oh, that was awful. That designer just does awful work wherever he goes. So I will harken back to one that's passed, and it's the one that you'd expect me to bring up. There was a certain designer from the, well, I mean, he started work in the 30s with Stanley Thompson. So now you know exactly who it is. And there's a lot to be said for his longevity and his productivity. No doubt about it. That's incredible. And growing up in my 20s, not 30s, I was probably done with it by then. But 20s, before you know anything about it, I enjoyed his courses. They were fine. But the older you get, and the more you read up, and the more people you speak with, you realize that this was the advent of production golf courses.
Okay.
Conveyor belt golf courses with very little thought and imagination and creativity gone into them, and that's one of the beauties of great golf course architecture these days. People like Doak and Hans and Kidd and DeVries and Clayton and Reb and Johns and again I'm blanking on other names at the moment, and they'll come to me the second we finish. But their design build, or they're very close to the build, and they sweat blood and tears into their work, and it shows, and it's beautiful, and it's to their eternal credit. Whereas the conveyor belt designers, Jones to begin with, and then the name came out eventually.
I was going to say, I was going to give a few hints.
And then Nicholas and Fazio after that. Again, and that's not to say they haven't done great courses, because they have. And I'm not going to be snobby and say that Jack Nicklaus has never built a great golf course, because he has. Same with Fazio, and same with Jones. But Jones, when I think the first time that as I said, I played a lot of Jones, or a handful of Jones courses in my 20s without really understanding, anything about golf course architecture. As I get into my 30s, as I'm really starting to get into the subject and decide what is a good golf course and what isn't, what's interesting, what's enjoyable, and what isn't. One of the first courses I play is a course in Colorado, and it's an old Donald Ross course. And Jones came along. I don't know exactly when, but he built another course, and he changed 9 of the Ross holes. Yeah. And the difference between the two halves is stark. It is jarring, and it is disappointing. The Ross holes, you know, everyone has just got a little something about it. It just sticks in the memory. It's just a little interesting little quirk, or, you know, it throws up an interesting shot or an interesting question. And the Jones holes are entirely predictable and look exactly the same. And, you know, they just look like someone has winged it and sent a quickly drawn sketch to the construction crew and said, right, build this. And it's and that's, you know, that's why Jones has such a bad reputation. And such bad, that's not fair. But, you know, why his reputation among architecture aficionados isn't great. You know, let's see a bigger picture. He was around for 50, 60 years.
The longevity.
He built a lot of really good courses, some absolute horrors, but some good ones. And there's a lot to be said for that. But this particular course in Colorado is I was shocked.
A mix of candor and prudence in that response. Tony, so great to visit with you again, man. Always a pleasure going on the trips together. I will look forward to the next FAM so we can continue this discussion about golf, my golf swing, my golf ball placement in relation to my stance, which I opened the show with, that you helped me with.
How did that work, by the way? Is that working well?
Still working on it. It's a process. As you know, it's a process. Friends, check out his work again. Links Magazine, Colorado Avid Golfer, McKellar Magazine, Points Beyond. Follow him on Twitter at Tony J. Deere. Thank you so much for your time, my friend. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Jed. A great pleasure.